their ways in influencing some of the largest issues that are currently ongoing in this world. Now, just for a bit of a spoiler of this session, at the end of this session, the last segment, we will be actually having a few different breakout groups. So I really want everyone in this room to start thinking of different strategies and solutions that we can put together. As young people, we really do believe in the power of storytelling, and we're hoping for the outcomes of this session to take the form and shape a global manifesto that can be taken to other UN forums, to other global discussions, to really pivot how we can allow access to knowledge through storytelling of two very intersected issues that often do not really are not really vocalized and are not really amplified within global discourse and global UN forums. So please, I really encourage you all to tap into the stories of the young people today that we're speaking to, and to start to challenge how we can really create strategic impact, particularly for stakeholders in this room today. So as I mentioned, my story at the beginning of this session, I'm really excited to delve into the stories of our panelists, particularly in highlighting some of the issues that have come out of some of the largest geopolitical crises in the world. We have heard from incredible panelists from Venezuela, Thailand, Egypt, Congo, and I'm very excited to tap into some of their lived experiences in navigating both challenges. So Alejandro, I might pass it over to you. Why don't you share a bit of your story with the rest of the audience?
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you to PMAC. Thank you to Peter, my fellow panelists, and to you all. And this is going to be an interesting session. So prepare yourself for a lot of storytelling. My story starts when I was born. I was born with asthma. When I was 16 years old, I had to leave my country, Venezuela, due to its political and socio-economic crisis, and flee to Colombia, the neighboring country. I was not the only one that had to do that. We're currently 9 million Venezuelan migrants and refugees, which is the second largest migration crisis after Syria, even though we are not at war. That's 9 million people, is more or less 30% of my country that have left the country in the last 10 years. And as it happens so many times, refugee communities are disproportionately affected by health inequities. So when I arrived to Colombia, I realized that my asthma got worse due to air pollution. At first, I didn't know what air pollution was, so I decided to learn whether other young people were also affected by it. Air pollution today kills 1 in 5 people per year. That's around 7 million people every year that die to diseases related to air pollution. In my own context of Latin America, that's 130 million children under the age of 5 years old that breathe air so polluted that it risks their health and development. And in my particular case of Colombia, every 50 minutes, 1 person dies of diseases related to air pollution. And we're not even one of the most polluted countries in Latin America. That is an excellent example of how geopolitics is interconnected with health and with climate. You're not responsible for having to leave your own country, but then you're also not responsible of the inequities that you face when you arrive to your new home country. And for most refugee communities and refugee and forcibly displaced migrants, access to healthcare can depend on a piece of paper that can determine whether you live or die. That's how my story starts and how I decided to take action and start working to mobilize more young people to fight air pollution in Colombia and Latin America. Since 2018, we created first the National Citizen Network for Clean Air in Colombia and then the Latin American Coalition for Clean Air. And we have worked tirelessly to make sure that we have the capacity to influence public policies across all levels, from teaching kids in public schools in Colombia how to use low-cost sensors to monitor air pollution, to create big advocacy campaigns so we can mobilize over 50,000 people to advocate for clean air. For example, today we are in a air pollution contingency in Colombia. Due to extreme heating, the city has declared the first air pollution contingency because of the burning of the mountains near Colombia, ever in the history. So that's another example of how the climate crisis is continuing to exacerbate this. And I want to finish with a short story of how it all connects through storytelling, which I think some people have heard, but I'm sorry that I'm going to repeat it again. Well, the song of beating, okay. It all comes when in 2018, we had an air pollution contingency back in Colombia, and I decided to create a giant pair of cotton lungs and install them on the streets of Bogota, which I actually replicated last year in Times Square now that I live in New York. As the day got by, the cotton lungs started to become darker and darker with air pollution. And I remember a police officer came and he said to me, "What are those things? Like, is this like a danger to the city?" I was like, no, these are a representation of the lungs of people that are in this area, which was next to one of the most transited public transport stations. And then he looked at me and he said, "Well, this is my station. Do you think my lungs are like that?" And I did. And I think that's a good example of remembering that the climate crisis is a public health crisis. If we have one power here, everyone that is seated on this room, is to start pivoting that narrative. If you want to grab something of this PMAC, is that every time that you mention the climate crisis, you remember that it's a public health crisis.
Thank you so much for that, Alejandro. I think we all really forget sometimes how interconnected we are with each other's stories, and until you hear another person's story, you really do realize that our stories are very similar. Which brings me to you, Benita, as someone from Congo. Myself and yourself, we share very similar stories with what is going on in our countries back home. And in our homes right now, we are seeing Congo having one of the largest geopolitical crises in the world right now. We are seeing millions of people displaced. And I know that in your line of work, you specifically advocate for planetary health for not only the environment, but for the people. Could you please share a bit of your story about your home, the Congo?
Yes, of course. When I was coming up here and thinking about my story, I told myself that my story was just one story, because in my country, as many of you know, thousands of millions are displaced, and so many people have died. Even people are dying today because of geopolitical instability, and their story matters as well. But they cannot be here, they cannot share it. And that is really sad. I was also thinking about how this is not the first time that people have come together, countries have come together. We are here because we want to talk about the future of planet. We want to improve health. We want to do this because we've been seeing that. We've been hearing about the Congo. I just heard you talking about Palestine and heard you talking about your story. Climate change is real. Climate change is not this dystopian future that, when I was younger, I was thinking that, it's something that is going to happen in the future. That is not going to happen in the future because that is already happening now, right? So, like I said before, this is not the first time that, as part of my story, that I've been to conferences where people are getting together to decide, to try to bring countries together. That's why we have organizations like the UN, right? That's why now we have conferences that COP every single year, where they go try to decide what are we going to do tomorrow, but what is happening in the meantime? People are still dying today as we are speaking, right? And these countries, these people, these organizations that are always getting together to try to decide. This is not just in 2020. I was reading a little bit more about all the treaties that have been signed or drafted, all the protocols, everything that they started doing in the 1900s. I'm like, this is not new. People have been trying to solve this since the 1900s. We have had conventions, we have had treaties, we have had protocols. But why is nothing changing? Why are we still dying? Why am I the only person at this conference who can talk about the Congos because millions of people are dying? This should make us really mad. Like every single day when I'm asked to talk about my story, I'm asked to talk about the Congo, I am sad, I am mad. Because first of all, I have to talk about my story in a language that is not even my own. That is because of geopolitical things that happened when I was not even there, right? So now we have had treaties, we have had conventions, we have had so many things drafted by countries that believe that for the future to work, for us to be better, they have to come together, they have to work together, they have to create the UN, they have to do this and do that. But what has happened since then? Nothing. Because we can all agree, as part of our stories, that we have politicians that are really, really selfish. Everyone thinks about their own people. Americans only care about Americans. Big elephants, I guess, only cares about big elephants, as we heard, and small elephants have to be caring about small elephants too. So we don't know what's happening, but in the meantime, politicians decide what to focus on, and as of now, they have decided to not focus on only what matters to them, and that should stop. Talking about climate change, it is not in the future, it is now. Last year, we saw that, I was telling you that, we saw that in Morocco, millions of people died, earthquake, because what climate change is now. We have been talking about Sudan, we've been talking about Burkina Faso, and we can talk about the instability in my country, in the Congo, because so many people are displaced every single day. That compounded with climate change, people are dying because, why? Because big elephant and geopolitical agreements that happens when we are not even at the table. Those have to change. And we have to be really pissed because we know, we have heard today, we all know what's going on. We know that our countries are impacted. We know that as we are talking today, a story is dying in Congo, a story is dying in Gaza, a story is dying in Israel. People are dying as we're talking here. We know we have had treaties drafted. So how can we come together as young people, really, to stop just wishing? We have the papers, we have the research, right? How can we then start acting on it? Because we should be sad. Young people are dying today. Stories are being left untold. Of course, I can share my story every single day. I love sharing my stories, but what can we do? Like, what can we do to make things better for all of us? Because it is just not fair. And, you know, I'm hoping that we all out of here, you know, like you said, reflect on our own stories and think about ways we can to do and make our politicians very accountable for their actions, because what they do at the end of the day matters for all of us.
Thank you, Benita. I see so much of my story in yours. And do you know, before coming here, I really had a bit of a reflection myself as to how impactful a story could really be. It almost feels quite foolish when you have family members back home that are dying every minute, every second. And is a story enough? It's a real question. Is a story really enough? But I reflect back to my father, actually. My father, post-Iraq invasion, he was left permanently disabled. And every time I leave to go speak at a different conference, he says to me, Zahra, tell my story because I'm not able to do so. So Benita, we tell our family stories. We tell those stories that are being killed every single day because we cannot let stories die in vain. Our stories, as I've mentioned, will lead the future in shaping global demands. And that's what we're here to do. Omnia, I might shift over to you now. You have a very interesting career shift, actually. As a physician in Egypt, you've now really dedicated your entire life fighting the climate crisis and working within the health sector. Why don't you run us through a bit of your story and why the career shift?
Yeah, thank you so much. And until now, I always get this question, and I always think about, yeah, how, how to do that to continue doing that career shift. But it all started when I was a second-year medical student. And I was very fortunate to be selected to do an emergency medicine training, fellowship in Florida. And during my second weekend, it was my first time to go to the US. And during my second weekend, there was Hurricane Irma. And I was very unfamiliar with what a hurricane means. Coming from Egypt, we rarely had any climate-related disasters. And I was asked to evacuate my house and later learned that I was among the 7 million residents that had to evacuate because of the strength of the hurricane. Back then, it was the biggest to hit the US in 2016. And I saw firsthand how climate-related disaster affected both the physical and the mental health of the patients that I was working with at the hospital. Many patients came to us presenting with acute injuries and fractures because of hurricane-related strong winds and the flying debris. Elderly patients who had exacerbations of their existing heart conditions, but they also couldn't get the medical care in time because of the power outages and the road blockages. And afterwards, because of many people seeking shelter, we saw a rise in infectious diseases and respiratory disease outbreaks. And not to mention the anxiety and the distress of being in a hurricane, feeling helpless and unable to get the support, especially if you're on your own, that you need, as well as the post-trauma stress with people who are lost their houses, their jobs, as well as family members from an acute event. And when I went back to Egypt, I was very curious and also equally excited to see what I would learn as a physician about climate change and how I can respond to a climate-related disaster, but also the impacts of climate change on people's health through air pollution and other areas such as heat and mental health as well. But I was shocked to find that my medical education had no mention of climate change or environmental issues. And this meant that as a physician, it is my responsibility and a moral obligation to respond to climate change impacts on health, but equally, I was not prepared to address that. So through IFMSA, the Federation of Medical Students, we did a global survey to see whether climate change was mentioned in the curriculum, but we also delivered hours and hours of sessions that look at the intersection between climate and health to equip medical school students around the world to understand their responsibility to act on climate change in their hospital, but also in their community. And then I joined the first ever climate change conference in Katowice in 2018. And I saw that the health message had a powerful influence in this political space, bringing in the urgency of the need to act on climate change, because right there, the politicians and the negotiators were not only discussing resolutions or declarations, they are negotiating the health and well-being of young people, of children and adolescents in these very rooms. And yet, us as young climate activists and advocates were still siloed outside of these rooms. And 2 years later, I was fortunate to witness my country, Egypt, hosting COP27, and I was appointed by the Egyptian Minister of Foreign Affairs as the first youth envoy, with the vision of not only integrating youth perspectives for the first time within the design and the delivery of COP up to the political outcome of it, but also bringing in health and intergenerational equity into the process. And at that time, when I was asked to be appointed, I was also doing my residency. And I realized that during my residency, not a single day passed without a child presenting with an asthma exacerbation or lung infection that an antibiotic no longer can treat. I also saw many pregnant women presenting with maternal complications and even the impacts of heat on their unborn child. I also saw many adolescents presenting with malnutrition because of crop failure, because of the persistent drought in many areas around Egypt. And this drove me to take a break and to actually platform these stories, these frontline impacts of climate change on the health of the patients that I was working with, into the political, multilateral, complex process to bring in the sense of people's health into the climate negotiations and discussions. And together with the presidency, I was able to bring in a lot of the stories, but also concrete and practical text within the COP outcome decision. For the first time, we had the right to a health, clean, and safe environment in the outcome of COP. We also had the recognition of youth, not just our participation in the conference, but as national delegates in national country delegations. And afterwards, in COP28, there was the permanent institutionalization of the youth envoy role, so that every presidency has a young representative. And yesterday, the COP29 Azerbaijan presidency announced their third youth envoy to this process. So bringing in what our role can be within a political process, as well as emphasizing and centering our health and our mental well-being. And the final end to my story, I was still debating whether to go back or to still continue working at the intersection. And the one thing that pushed me to still do the work around climate and health was, as the youth envoy, I worked with many young people around the world, youth-led organizations, youth-led groups and activists, and I saw how we collectively felt overwhelmed, burned out, because of the crushing uncertainty that we are inheriting a future that we did not create. And we are pushing this burnout culture in the work that we are doing with no safeguarding mechanism to our mental health and well-being. And I discovered the Climate Cares team here in London that worked on understanding, responding, and co-creating interventions with young people and with people working in the climate space to work together to build our own resilience and protect our mental health while we are working at the climate and the political intersection.
Thank you so much, Omnia. I think you are truly a testament of incredible work young people are doing across the world to challenge the status quo. But Omnia, you bring up a very interesting point, in particular about witnessing this intersection of geopolitical crises and planetary health issues. And I think in particular, the reason why I choose to mention this is because for the first time in history, we're seeing technology being utilized to showcase some of the largest geopolitical crises online. I mean, I've opened up my social media every single day for the past few months, showcasing the stories of individuals that are being displaced by war, just being killed. And I think that this is truly a very important period in the future where we decide, in particular, how we choose to create new strategies and solutions. Technology is playing a very big way and a very big role in challenging our strategies and solutions. Thanasak and Meiji, you're both from Thailand, and how privileged are we to have a localized perspective in this panel discussion today. I know you both work on climate change and addressing air pollution, and Meiji, for yourself, you work on youth engagement and engaging more young people within this intersection. But Thanasak, I might start with you. How are you advocating for clean air, and what influenced your advocacy? What's your story, Thanasak?
Hey, thank you, Sarah. First of all, I think that my journey into clean air advocacy was deeply personal and began with my own health struggles. I have battled with obstructive sleep apnea and sinusitis, and I noticed the worsening effect during air pollution episodes. So I experienced the discomforts of struggling to breathe at night. The challenge extends beyond nighttime, because during the day, I found that the pollution not only affected me directly, but also limited my access to protective factors like outdoor exercise in the public parks. While some has access to air purifying gyms, they were neither affordable nor accessible to everyone. And in 2022, the PM 2.5 concentrations in Thailand exceeding the WHO annual air quality guideline by 3.6 times. And when I tried to analyze the air quality data from the government source near my home over the 3 consecutive years, I discovered that we had only 10 days per year with unacceptable level of PM 2.5 in 2022. Is that too good? When I explore or dig deeper, I found that this seemingly positive trend was misleading. The government's high cutoff point masked the reality that we still live with excessive air pollution for almost half a year. By this finding, I question the trustworthiness of the government as a duty bearer in protecting people's health. This sense of personal and community helplessness drove me to take an unconventional part in addressing air pollution in my country. Reflecting upon my journey, I think that it was just last year during PMAC that I first ventured into this field, focusing on the intersections of health and environment. That experience profoundly enriched my dedication to addressing this critical public health issue. I also used the visual art to communicate key concepts to climate and health action last year, if you remember, in this PMAC conference. In addition, I initiate a small-scale effort within my community, educating fellow community members on strategies to cope with existing air pollution level, and also do the policy forum on moving towards the right to clean air in Thailand. This endeavor aimed to push the issue of air pollution onto the political agenda, particularly during the general election in Thailand. However, these efforts don't seem to be enough to reduce the air pollution that affect people's daily life. The problem is more complicated because air pollution comes from various sources, including economic activities in Thailand and neighboring countries like Myanmar, Laos, PDR, and Cambodia. They burn agricultural waste, which adds to the pollution. At the first glance, it might seem like we can blame other countries for not taking responsibility. But when we dig deeper, we discover an inconvenient truth. Part of air pollution issue is linked to politics and economic issues in the Mekong sub-region. Here's what happens. Actually, China has a high demand for animal feed products, and Thai businessmen own transnational agro corporations that supply these products to China. And to keep production costs as low as possible, they started growing maize in the neighboring country instead of Thailand, where the labor and land are cheaper. But because these neighboring countries lack eco-friendly agricultural waste management, so they ended up burning crop residue, creating haze that affect people in Mekong sub-regions from February to May every year. This is an unintended consequence of trying to save money in the production process. So I have a question that how can one company benefit from unethical supply chain while others suffer from the consequences? The problem is that state and regional politics cannot effectively regulate these market issues. The companies close tied to the Thai government even lead to favorable policies like zero import taxes for maize. This situation shows how trade and politics can affect our health, either by causing, sustaining, or worsening the problems. One solution could be to use geopolitical actions like enforcing legal reparation or sanctions to improve air quality in the region. On another note that is a sad note, just last month, there was an armed conflict. It's called Operation 1027 against the Myanmar's coup government. This conflict displaced about 200,000 people and disrupt agriculture in Chan State, which borders Thailand, and it's a major source of maize imports to Thailand. As a result, we are observing whether trans-boundary air pollution might decrease due to this conflict. But it is actually sad because even we get better air quality, but so many lives were lost and displaced from their home in these situations. And all of this demonstrates how air pollution in the Mekong sub-region is a complex issue, influenced by politics, climate change, and health, which youth participations can play a role in addressing this situation. And from my observations, the youth participations in the regions, I witnessed inspiring youth advocacy for clean air worldwide through the Open AQ Ambassadors program. Some are working to hold government accountable for air quality data transparency, while others use their expertise in strategic litigation to protect those working in poor environmental conditions. These individuals have shown the potential of youth in addressing climate change. However, when I look back to my regions or my country, despite the growing movement for political rights and gender equality, this discrepancy raises questions about awareness and relatability to climate change's impact on daily life. Even Thailand ranked the ninth on the Global Climate Risk Index, and with economic loss in the last 20 years for about like $7,700 million, and 1/3 of its population is at risk. The disproportionate impact of vulnerable groups underscore the need to increase youth movement in addressing climate change. And this is about my action, my advocacy, and the observations toward the situations of youth engagement and climate change in the region. Thank you.
Thanks, Tanasak. You bring the vital point about engaging more young people within your solutions as well. And I think, Meiji, you can testify how your work has really engaged more young people across Thailand. Why don't you run us through your advocacy, what that looks like, and what influenced your advocacy, particularly here in Thailand?
Right. Thank you, Tanasak, and also Sarah. I just wanted to start out by saying that I also have allergic rhinitis, which in Gen Z term, it means that it's a canon event. Seeing that we have both of 3 of our panelists here having that as well. So I am legitimately a youth who has direct impact from the PM 2.5 or like climate change consequences, but also there are other problems that I do not face directly because I am a youth advocate here in the heart of Bangkok. So this is the story of me as a youth advocate here, which do not experience a lot of the things going on, but I have the passion, and also my team, we have the passion to change a lot of things. So in IFMSA Thailand, where I work primarily, we did our best to include the opinions of those around Thailand by including opinions from all medical schools all over Thailand in each region. Before we decide to do an advocacy work, we prioritize those advocacy areas in each year before we move forward as an organization. And the second thing we do is we try to work with other youth coalitions to encourage heterogeneity, because oftentimes we forget that youth is not a homogeneous group. And I think this is, it is very easy to fall into this trap, especially as an older generation, but sometimes as a younger generation, we forget that as well. So that's why we try to work with as many youth groups as possible from all over Thailand. So with that internal mindset in mind settled, we set our central advocacy goals to be meaningful youth engagement in health. And if you know about meaningful youth engagement, there are many frameworks, but I'd like to use the fundamental one, which is the ladders of meaningful youth engagement, where in the first step, youth is manipulated, and then as we climbed up the ladders, youth are then tokenized and then consulted, and then at the highest of the ladder, which is the 8th level, youth and adult coexist together to do decision-making and have those authorities together. So we started off in IFMSA Thailand by, in the lower levels, we were invited to conferences, but we didn't have any say in anything that was present. And I think a lot of youth who worked in this sector, especially everyone here in this panel, will understand the rage and the frustration felt when we feel that we're not heard and that we are used as a token. But as time flies, we did a lot more advocacy work, and all our efforts were then more recognized. And so we climbed up the ladders step by step. We were then invited to talk and have a say in the National Health Assembly. We then got a chance to do panels and create side meetings in PMAC and also other health conferences around Thailand. But even though in that time, like I was speaking to my international colleagues and they were all saying that, oh, well, Thai health system is very inclusive of youth, but I was still doubtful about it because I feel like the progress was so slow. But I think these things do take time. All these efforts that I've been talking about, it actually started way before my year. It started with a lot of alumni in IFMSA Thailand. So I have been one of the lucky ones because in my year, and these years particularly, I think a lot of trend in youth is coming. There's a trend in capacity building within the Thai health system that they want to capacitize youth, and also with the upcoming trends like digital health and AI, it's more apparent than ever that the health system needs youth to be on board. So I'm one of the lucky ones that it is easier to be engaged to other stakeholders in my generation. So as you can see, meaningful youth engagement has a lot of factors into play. And I think the highest we reached in terms of meaningful youth engagement was around level 7, where we initiated and talked and lead a youth-led event about planetary health, geopolitics, and meaningful youth engagement, which I will expand more after this. So all in all, I just wanted to say that this is the story and of what we did in Thailand, as IFMSA Thailand did and other youth coalitions did as well. Yeah, that.
Thanks, Meiji. I think you bring us very nicely into the next segment of this panel discussion. And in particular, this panel really challenges how young people utilize their stories to create concrete impacts, utilizing some of these geopolitical dynamics to address climate change and health equity. And I guess a small example from my end, it's not really the biggest example, but I truly love to leverage small impacts that many young people are creating across the world to address big challenges that often young people feel quite scared to talk about. But for myself and for my community as a Palestinian, myself and my friends a few weeks ago, we decided to put together a new campaign that is called Plant for Palestine. And we have been planting trees across many different communities that have been impacted by air pollution, to be able to not only pay our respects to some of our family members that have been killed due to this ongoing crisis in Palestine and in Gaza, but also to really look at how young people play a massive role in addressing large-scale solutions that can sometimes look like they are so out of reach. But I'm keen to jump into some of the solutions that the panelists have addressed across navigating some of these large-scale geopolitical dynamics. Alejandro, I might pass it over to you. What's something you've implemented?
Questions. No, you got me thinking first on the planting trees, and I think there is one of the most important things that I think young people bring to the table is the possibility to reframe, bring new symbols in how we talk about certain things. Either grief, air pollution, trees, planting, but it's a way of connecting people with a new message, instead of just going all in directly to talk about policy. And in my experience, the use of symbols and the capacity to bring people together to discuss by using something that regularly is not a traditional mechanism to talk about that issue has been very successful. So two specific examples, talking about migration, another issue that I have worked a lot in my life has been xenophobia and the rejection of migrants and refugees. So for example, in 2019, we had our first local elections after the migration crisis from Venezuela and Colombia, and we saw a huge spike of xenophobia in Bogota and in Colombia. So what I did was I went to every single refugee shelter in the city and collected 500 pairs of shoes, of used shoes from migrants that walk from Venezuela to Colombia. That's around 2,000 kilometers. Around 2 weeks walking without stopping. So you had thousands of shoes that were like so round and they were there. So I asked them like, oh, can I use these shoes? And everyone was like, why? I was like, 1 second. So I took the shoes and I put them on the main street of Bogota, of the main square of Colombia. I put it in front of Congress and I did like a huge conference press and told politicians, so how would you feel if you were on these people's shoes? What would you do if you had to leave your own country? And that sparked a huge conversation in the country around the importance of fighting xenophobia and the role that the government had to fight hate speech, for example. And it all started, as a youth movement. And we have done the same thing with air pollution. Another example, we had an air pollution contingency, and we convinced all the schools in a particular neighborhood of Bogota of changing the flag of the country with red flags according to their quality index, and everybody raised their red flags because we were in air pollution in an air pollution contingency. So you see all the neighborhood schools only red flags, and that was a symbol to tell people, don't take your kids to school today, or don't play outside because it's going to be more harmful. I think we as young people have that power of saying, we have always talked about this in this way, let's reshape it, let's talk it this way. And that, of course, needs to go hand in hand with a lot of public policy influencing policy roundtables, but that's not the best way to grasp people's attention. And I think what I fear a lot in this age is grasping people's attention and mobilizing. So I wanted to finish a quick question to everyone in the room, just out of curiosity, because I think it's going to work for everyone afterwards. If you have ever participated in a mobilization or in a protest, can you raise your hand? You see, a lot of people, but not everyone. And I think part of that is we want everyone in the future, when we ask that question, to raise their hand. And a way of doing it is through changing the way that we approach protests and making sure that symbols are part of this conversation. So we need to find new symbols. And I think that's part of the job that we are here doing at PMAC.
Thank you, Alejandro. And it's interesting that both of our solutions so far have been really focused on bringing a lot of public pressure and campaigning work. And I guess when I was speaking to the panelists a few weeks ago, we were really talking about how young people too often, the one thing that they don't have is resources to be able to create a large-scale impact. I think that that's a really good example about, we'll talk about some of our calls to action later on during this panel, but I really want you all to remember, if young people did have the resources to be able to large-scale some of their impact, where would we be today? Benita, a solution from you?
Yes. Like I was saying before, that sentiment that I had of, I'm from Congo, I'm from Africa. So many of us were, getting together and being tired of telling these stories of, why us? But we're also asking questions about how can we change this narrative? How can we come up with stories of being happy? And so we have to invest in our communities to begin doing that work. So, and then I remember I was in a meeting with a person who is now the current advisor to the president of the DRC. And he was talking about how they often know in our country, in my country, and in many African countries, what needs to be done. But often they just lack the expertise and the resources to negotiate and advocate for what they want, right? And so we had this idea to actually start training our own young people. I am currently working with an organization in Cameroon, and we have social media now. And so we were like, how can you use that right now to invest in our communities? So now we offer free webinar training on peace building in your community, right? Because we understand now that what we do at the local and regional level has so much impacts. Peace building in our communities, peace building in the DRC, peace building in Cameroon. What can we do as young people with what we have to make that happen? And so we've been offering training on that. We've also been doing qualitative research training, which was interesting because the first time we were trying it, it was just on LinkedIn. We put on LinkedIn, we are inviting young people, a qualitative research training, and more than 2,000 young people from Africa applied to participate, and they've been participating since. So young people know what is at stake and they want, especially young African. So we are now doing qualitative research, mostly because we want to have a better understanding of our own communities from our own perspectives, because that is really important. We are tired of people telling our stories. We want to be telling our own stories. And so this is one approach that we've been doing. And also encouraging most of them to just publish op-eds. Tell your story. An op-ed, it's really great. Like, tell me if you want me if you want to talk via Zoom, because now we have Zoom, we need to be using all of this. We have AI, we have Zoom. How can I help you use what you have? And if you don't know what's out there, please ask me and I will tell you. So we've been really, really open and really using LinkedIn. Things are going pretty well. So we hope to continue doing that, because we need young people, African people are already empowered. They just need the expertise and the resources, and that's what we are providing them with.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Benita. Meiji?
Okay, right, so expanding on what I said earlier. So a solution that we did concerning the integration between meaningful youth engagement, planetary health, and geopolitics is a project called the Thailand Youth Policy Initiative, or TYPE. So TYPE was actually born because during the years that we were attending the National Health Assembly, we were trying to incorporate youth by asking the host, who is the National Health Commission Office, that we would like to include other youth groups into the NHA as well, because we, as I said before, heterogeneity is important. So while we were doing that, the NHCO got a very creative idea that maybe we can do a youth national health assembly in Thailand to incorporate and get youth to come together and think of policies to be incorporated into Thai health policy in general. So they asked us, IFMSA Thailand, to do a pilot project on this matter, and so that's what we did. We created a competitive platform for youth to be able to use their policy making efforts to be a solution to a given problem, and that has been very great. So in the first TYPE, the theme was mitigating the problems of PM 2.5. So that was one of the first government and youth-led work on planetary health in Thailand as well. And in terms of geopolitics, I think this event really showcases and to our youth how policies can be a solution to geopolitical health problems. In geo, I mean that policies can cover a lot of areas within our country and also include youth, and include the many vulnerable groups of youth into the policies as well. And in politics, it shows to youth that, well, health is deeply rooted in politics, and health can be a hidden agenda in politics. And yeah, like problems like PM 2.5 are not problems that are within our borders only, but are intertwined in the politics of cross borders of other countries as well. So TYPE was a success first in terms of the awareness of policies raised in the younger generation in Thailand. So around 200 to 300 people applied, ranging from high schoolers to university students, and they all got many interesting ideas on how to integrate policies into tackling PM 2.5 problems. And there were a lot of creative ideas on digital health and AI as well. And the second thing that was successful was that it was the first ever and the biggest youth and governmental collaboration for the Ministry of Public Health at the time. And this event led to many more youth-initiated events in the near future. However, it could be a lot better. Well, firstly, the impact that we were hoping for, which is that the winning team's policies will be carried out or implemented in the Thai health policy as they promised. They were not carried out supposedly because I believe that there might not be an existing framework on how to incorporate youth-led policies or how to incorporate the youth who won in this long journey ahead of them. And a little part of me hope it is not true, but I believe there was an unwillingness to do so as well. And the second point of how it can be improved is that Type B is a full-scale work, and I feel like the older generation we worked with, they kind of failed to realize that we have our academic limitations at hand, so we cannot work on such big events as a full-time job. We do not get salary, and this leads to the third point, which is that this particular thing leads to a misunderstanding that we are not committed to our passion enough. So that's why in the end Type B continued as an ad hoc event where youth convene to talk on a particular policy-related topic instead of the end goal, which is to finally create a youth national health assembly. So that never happened. And it was such a shame to see like a project go into fruition, but was never picked and consumed in the end.
Thanks, Meiji. Omni, I might turn it over to you.
Yeah, so one of the things I wanted to share that we are currently working on, which is it is a project that looks into the intersection between climate change and mental health. What was in the last couple of years, there's a lot of very interesting and important research around how climate change affects mental health, particularly in young people, and also the compounding crises that we are all experiencing, whether it is conflict and war, whether it's the economic crisis and cost of living, as well as the climate crisis. And we can all see how it is disproportionately affecting young people, particularly our access to health, to education, to healthcare services, as well as us envisioning our future. So the idea was to leverage the lived experience insights of people who are disproportionately affected by the impacts of climate change on their mental health and combine that with the research that is out there. And our project is called Connecting Climate Minds. And we did it in a way that it is based in all 7 Sustainable Development Goal regions, but it is led by regional organizations. In each region, the organization, together with us and a global team of over 20 partners, created a community of practice where we have an organization, a set of young ambassadors, and lived experience advisors. And we organized 21 dialogues across all regions, bringing in the mental health researchers and experts, psychologists and psychiatrists, together with climate experts and policymakers, discussing how does climate change affect mental health of the people in the region, and what are the interventions, what are the solutions out there that build the resilience or address mental health, or how is climate change integrated in mental health and psychosocial support services, and vice versa, how is mental health integrated in climate adaptation and mitigation plans. And all of these dialogues, together with a set of in-person dialogues that were dedicated for young people. We held 3 dialogues in India, as well as in Nigeria, and we held other dialogues with indigenous communities, understanding how climate change affects their mental health, as well as smallholder farmers, who many are now losing their lives to suicide because of crop failure and drought and loss, which leads to loss of income and being unable to provide for their families because of the impacts of climate change. Similarly, with indigenous communities and people and local peoples who are losing their land, their culture, because of climate-related disasters, young people who are experiencing anxiety because of, again, the lack of meaningful integration of our voices and being able to impact the policies that are affecting or shaping climate change, and at the same time being disproportionately affected both our physical and our mental health and well-being. And these incredible dialogues has been taking place all over the year. And I was leading the dialogue that took place in the Middle East region. And for the first time, we had a dialogue that looked at the intersection between mental health and climate change in Arabic and English. And we were able to discuss not only climate change, but also how mental health as an issue has been stigmatized, and there's a lack of knowledge, but being able and awareness of how to talk about mental health, how to seek help, and how to do that, and how climate change is actually contributing, as well as the crises that we are experiencing as a region, to the mental health of our people in the crisis and in the region. And this helped us develop a set of agendas, regional and global agendas, developing research and action priorities for this intersection so that we can bring in funders, bring in experts, bring in the researchers and the academic institutions to look into mental health and climate change.
Thank you so much, Omnia. We may be having technical difficulties, but Tanasak, if you are still there, I now invite you to present some meaningful, impactful ways that you've created a change in Thailand.
Okay, sorry for my technical problem. So before discussing the impactful solutions we have implemented, it is essential to clarify that my role as a no-vice advocate is part of the collective effort, and the activity I initiated, for example, like connecting Thailand Thailand Clean Air Network with the Health Authority and participating in International Clean Air Day are collaborative endeavors. So I humbly consider myself as an observer and early implementer here to share the lesson learned from our journey. So now let me highlight our most impactful contributions of Thailand Clean Air Network in advocating for Clean Air Act. This initiative seeks to streamline the governance of air pollution, securing commitments and clean air fund for clean air actions. Crucially, it aims to ensure meaningful community participations in achieving clean air for all. The proposed law extends fines and enforcement to entities contributing to transboundary haze, addressing the complex intersections of geopolitics, climate change, health, and youth participation. As a health professional, traditionally focused on downstream adaptation strategies for climate change, the opportunity to influence governance it's both significant and hopeful. This initiative goes beyond aiding individuals downstream. It activates governance to address root cause embedded in political socioeconomic systems, aspiring to create a healthier environment and fairer society. For the impact, 7 drafts from various stakeholders have passed the first degree consideration in the House of Representatives just last week. So this progress signals acceptance of the legislation's principle. Importantly, there is a noticeable increase in awareness among Thai populations regarding the threatening impact of air pollution. Social media sentiments have surged. Citizen science analytics have become prevalent, and people can now identify areas with persistent PM 2.5 level, influencing their decisions on house buying. So we have reached a state where particulate matter, which is usually invisible, it's really relatable to health and economic repercussions in people's minds. These combinations of scientific understanding and public sentiment exerts pressures on politicians, ensuring that clean air remains a top priority. We are optimistic about the imminent passage of the National Clean Air Law. However, there remains a critical gap in international law and policy to hold transnational corporations accountable for exploitative practice impacting both environment and public health. Despite the existing of the ASEAN Agreement on Transboundary Haze Pollution, a minimal improvement is evident. This regional agreement, while collaborative, it's non-binding, and its sanctions measures are inadequate. For the dispute settlement mechanism relies solely on negotiation, which is a process that many academics argue that it can be pursued independently without the agreement. Considering these limitations, we must look ahead And there are promising areas within international agreements, such as ASEAN Human Rights Declaration, which includes the right to health and environmental rights. As a youth movement, we can leverage these international agreements to apply pressure on the governments in the Mekong region. And we aim to hold them accountable for ensuring the right to breathe clean air for everyone in the region.
Thank you so much, Thanasak. I think your notions of accountability and transparency your notions of transparency and accountability are truly fundamental ways in addressing some of the institutional and structural entry points and barriers as well that prevent our integration within addressing geopolitical issues. I think what better way before we open up our breakup groups than to have a call to action from all the young people on this panel discussion right now. I guess I encourage you all to ask stakeholders in this room and beyond, what would you like to see? How can we all collaboratively work together to address some of these challenges and to reform institutional barriers that prevent our involvement within this process?
I think a key component is to understand that if you want young people to thrive, you need to give them money. That's very clear. I see so many young leaders that lead social movements that don't have the capacity, and that a lot of it is because of the lack of financial resources, to transform those movements into nonprofits. Sometimes you need social movements, sometimes you need nonprofits. Many times you actually need the nonprofit, exactly for what you mentioned, is because people want to live from their work, therefore they need a salary, therefore they cannot do it as a social movement. So philanthropies, for example, are a lot of in PMAC. Philanthropy to young people, like youth-led organization, is like 0.0001% of the total amount of philanthropy in the world. And I just came from a brief séjour in Hispanics in philanthropy while I'm doing my master's at Columbia, and I kept asking myself that question is, how is it that I was able to do it? I end up creating a nonprofit. Now we're a very successful nonprofit with over $2 million budget per year, which is like a lot in Colombia. And I think the other side of the book coin, I don't know how was the expression in English, is that, to be honest, something that people don't tell young people is that you need to work a lot. That's the other side. It's like, oh, we need to, yeah, but you need to work a lot. And I think normally when you see all these young people in these panels, what they don't tell you is that they have worked a lot. Like tireless nights, like all-nighters, like weekends, like you're like, all your friends are like, why are you working so hard? And you're like, oh, because I want to make a difference, and it's not that easy. So it's two-sided. You need a nonprofit, you need money, but to create a nonprofit that has money, you need a solid nonprofit that requires work.
Thank you, Alejandro. I think that you speak very truthfully for many of us on this panel discussion as to all the unpaid labor that we do to create a change. And again, this isn't just about creating a change, but it is our stories, it's our livelihoods, it's our families that really do inspire us and push us to create a change. We don't do this just because of the betterhood, the livelihood that we'd like to see, but also because it's personal. Advocacy is so personal, and I think for most people at PMAC, advocacy is integrated deeply within our stories. This is why we do what we do. Benita, to you.
Yes. Like I mentioned before, we are in a time where many young people want peace, right? I understand that my peace is connected to yours, even though we are from different continents or different countries. And we want better collaboration between countries, talking about treaties and what needs to be signed. We need new approaches to new treaties, and hopefully, new perspective will be added to what needs to be done. Because what we need peace, we understand that we are in this together. There is no worse Africa with a better Asia. It's no, we are in this together, like we heard before, we are in the same boat. So hopefully, coming out of here, we will start working on the treaties that we need and not just stop at drafting them. Also help us enact them so that we can make our politicians accountable for their actions. Because again, we need peace, both looking at the geopolitical level, and we need a better planet as well. Like, I want to survive. I want my children and the children of my children to survive. We are thinking about tomorrow. The other point is the point I made on technical expertise. We can talk about treaties, we can talk about going to these conferences, but so many of our communities, so many people in our countries, we need the expertise and the resources to actually go at those tables and advocate for what they know they want. So we need to be investing into countries that need these resources, provided to them so that they can go where they need to go and negotiate for better global partnership, collaboration, and hopefully, very optimistic despite everything that's going on. Hopefully, some of us here will go out there and support the young people and bring them to tables that need their perspectives.
Thank you, Benita. I'm very hopeful that you're also feeling optimistic, particularly given the hundreds and thousands of revolutionary young people that I believe are also shaping how we push for resources and how we push for capacity building as well. So I appreciate your optimism. I think it can be very contagious in particularly a time like this where everything feels very unknown. Meiji, over to you.
Right, so I just want to echo what Alejandro said about us doing a lot of work right now. Look at our eye bags. But yeah, so what we were working for is actually towards this particular session where there's a lot of stakeholders here in this room. I see you all. And I'm hoping that the very fruitful discussion in the roundtable afterwards will be one of the top things that we're aiming for in meaningful youth engagement. And also, I love this part of the session where we do the call to action. It's my favorite thing to do, especially in this room. So my call to action to the older generation, I would say, the governments, NGOs, civil society, private sector. First, young people are enthusiastic and we are passionate. And the easiest and best way for you to work with us is to give us a platform, and the rest is easy. You know, we will be on there, we will talk, and we will voice our opinions on there. And it is very simple, and you will gain a lot from it. The second point is capacity building. Capacity building in youth, you can say that it is the key to a stronger future national health security for every country. So investing in youth in that sense is kind of important if you put it that way. And in a sense, it comes back to platforms as well, because platforms are good capacity building tools for youth as well. And the third point, finally, I think there needs to be a basic understanding of the nature of youth. Firstly, as I mentioned a lot of times before, the heterogeneity of the youth. In those platforms, I think you should incorporate a lot of youth from many different socio-economic, geopolitical backgrounds into those platforms as well. And also, we have unique limitations in terms of our ability to do long-term events. But what if there is a middle young person in the government that can work with us and the government as well? Like we see in the UN or in COP that Omnia is, you know, the youth envoy. Why can't every government have a young person who's working full-time, being a connector to the youth? And yeah, I mean, that's a very good, I mean, there's an example of it. Why not have one, or maybe multiple of those youth up there in the governments? And to the youth, again, I think youth, we also sometimes forget that we are not homogeneous. So the youth in this room, we are very privileged to be able to come here all together. So don't forget about the youth that are not here in this room as well. Invite them to the projects that you're doing to gain as many insights as possible. And last thing is that do not be discouraged by your losses, because as we do advocacy work, we have our wins as well, so stick to that. Looking back, like there were a lot of moments where, small advocacy work, we thought that might be nothing, but it shaped me into who I am today. And I think it will pave a very good path toward the future, because advocacy work is in fact the training for us to fight in other problems in the future as well. So yeah, that's it from my side.
Thank you, Meishi. I think the valid point of bringing more youth to the table is so integral. And in particular, some young people, we're unable to even hear of them in person. Our only way to hear of them is online through technology. So bring them in through our avenues that are creating meaningful ways of engagement as well, through digital avenues, through in-person collaboration, through funding, just as we've spoken about. There are so many diverse ways to bring and call more young people in. Omnia, over to you.
Yeah, I would just pick this up and also say that, I would have 3 call to actions. The first would be looking into the education and the training of young people. We need to rethink how we are preparing and building the capacity of young people to engage in these geopolitical discussions, to recognize that their voice and their perspectives, and they are important and equal stakeholders to the discussions that are being made within their governments, within multilateral organizations, and they are also representatives of the communities that they come from and that they serve. And to do that, we need to empower them and build and integrate the knowledge and the capacities of what meaningful participation means, what working in climate change or addressing the political issues and the crises that their countries are experiencing, and how they can play a fundamental role in that, integrating this in their own school education as well as their university curricula, and at the same time finding ways to protect their mental health and resilience when doing that. The second thing is the power of reorientation. I personally saw firsthand how reorienting an institutional structure such as the presidency played and made a breakthrough when it comes to having not just young people invited or being there in one-off event, but being part of a governmental structure, being, as Meiji said, a connector, but also a representative of youth perspectives in a way that is sustainable, and having that consistent guidance and view of the needs, the challenges, but also the solutions that are being proposed by the diversity of young people, because we are not a homogeneous group or stakeholder. We are diverse in our expertise, in our backgrounds, and also the work that we are doing and that we can bring in to the policies that are being designed, but also implemented. So reorientation is so important, and going beyond the rhetoric of should we invite a young person to, what sort of youth-led solutions are we going to invest in? And this takes me to my third point, which is investment. Investment in our capacity, providing funding that is accessible, that is sustainable, and that not just giving young people, and with very little you can help young people establish their own organizations and their solutions, but it's not just about funding, it's also about mentoring and providing the support, the capacities and the skills for us as young people to have our ideas, have our solutions, have our time funded and supported financially, but also having that mentorship and vice versa, really mentoring policymakers to work with young people, and young people to work with the policymakers and the philanthropic institutions and the organizations, and having that meaningful versus a transactional relationship between us and the generations of policymakers who are now becoming younger every year. So that's it from my end.
Thank you so much, Omnia, for that comprehensive outline of your recommendations. I hope everyone was taking notes. Tanasak, finally over to you.
Okay, thank you. I think that I'm here before you today with a call to action, a plea that resonates with the heart of young change makers and those who guide their journey. In this room, there are 2 crucial groups of people I wish to address. Firstly, to all the incredible youth in this room, let's talk about the barrier we face. Even we are included in the negotiation table, even we can set the agenda in the negotiation table. But if we have this one barrier in your mind, this is an internalized domination. We may not be able to make a meaningful participation in the agenda that we push forward. So these self-imposed limits can leave us with feeling helpless, wondering how we can make a meaningful impact. So I found an inspiration in a quote by Rudolf Virchow. He once said that medicine is a social sign, and politics, it's nothing more than a medicine on a grander scale. This quote is a reminder that as young health professionals, we can stretch beyond the traditional boundary in health to engage in social interventions. You, the youth, hold the legitimacy to call for the future you desire. So be altruistic, be genuine, and lend your voice to implementing preventive measures against looming threats. Looking to initiatives like Health for Extinction's Rebellion for inspiration. Let's embrace the unconventional and rise to the challenges presented by these unprecedented crises. And secondly, to all the youth enablers here in this room, those who understand the importance of empowering youth, your role is indispensable. Youth empowerment thrives on your support, much like gender equity requires everyone to fully embrace its principles. As a connector between the youth and seasoned executives in my organization, I implore you to keep a space for youthful innovation within the system, not just in name, but in practice. Understand our inherent flaws as young and naive. Provide us the opportunity to learn, to stand on the shoulders of giants, and to fail within the caring embrace of your experience. So let's transform the intergenerational gap into a creative learn and grow space, maximizing your wisdom for the benefits of future generations. Together, we can address the challenges we face and reform institutional barriers. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Thanasak. I think that that's a very powerful toolkit already of young people's demands for the future. But I guess jumping us into the final section of this panel discussion, I'm really excited for this section because at the inception of this panel discussion, I spoke about young people wanting to create a manifesto of demands, particularly for our future, and to address this intersection of geopolitical dynamics and climate health leadership as well. So for this part of the session, in the last 15 minutes that we have, we are really hoping to get everyone's brains jogging in this room and to think of some demands that we've collectively worked together to build. We really want our stories to live on beyond this room, because I'm sure many of you as well, you've gone to many conferences, sat in a panel discussion, and really our conversations and our calls to action, they end right there. But we're really hoping to take this manifesto beyond rooms like PMAC and to future global gatherings where we are able to explore the delicacy and the demands of this intersection. So to the people in the back, could you please join a table? Our fabulous panelists in person will be joining a table, and we'll be collaborating to really address and ask the question, how do we challenge some of the institutional barriers that our young people on this panel discussion have spoken about into long-term strategies? At the end of this discussion, myself and the other panelists will be actually putting together this manifesto that will be taken to other global forums, like the UN Summit of the Future in September this year and COP29 in Azerbaijan this year. Amazing. I think we might get started, but to our online panelists, if we could give together a round of applause to our incredible online panelists for their time.